I'm standing on the grounds of where the Fort Apache Youth Center used to stand. On this site, one day soon, will be a new youth center and an 87-unit affordable housing complex that's going to build on the legacy of the Fort Apache Youth Center.
I went by and saw Fort Apache. Well, it wasn't Fort Apache then. And I went in and I looked at it and I found out who the owners were and what they wanted for it. And that's where Fort Apache started. Trying to have a neutral area for some of these kids. Once we got it open, now there's no borders.
Fort Apache was my foundation, the place where I became a great fighter. I was in the streets, you know, I was doing drugs, and I started boxing to change my life around and just wanted to fulfill my goal, you know, being somebody, you know, proving something to myself.
The South Bronx in the 70s and 80s was plagued by violence. Street gangs, you know, that was the real deal. And then in the 80s and then the 90s, it was extremely plagued by drugs.
That area of the South Bronx, the Hunts Point section and down, I mean, the radio never stayed silent. You were through with 8 hours and it felt like you only worked 2.
There were a lot of people that lived in the Bronx at that time that witnessed their children not having access to recreation, not having affordable housing, not having jobs. You saw a lot of fractured relationships with local NYPD at the time.
Police and community relations were at high tensions. Crime was pretty high. So you had something like Fort Apache that really just combated against that.
Having that environment with Fort Apache and Big George telling me you can do that. It builds character, it builds self-respect for yourself, for your family, for your community. They don't want you just to succeed in boxing, but outside of life. Boxing kept me on point. Like I would never take away anything from the South Bronx, but I know I want more from what I've been exposed to. And boxing has pretty much done that. I've won scholarships through boxing. And if it wasn't that I was having people talk to me and put me on track, I would have never thought about going back to school. I went back to college. I got my GED. I've been traveling since. I qualified for the Olympics.
George was tough. He was a man. He treated you like a man. He had the way of bringing that fight out of you.
And that's what that gym was about. It was encouraging you to do things that you didn't really think you can do. It was just like a neighborhood that you had to be tough and you had to be mentally tough in order to make it, in that gym and out that gym.
All those years to have the discipline and be able to do what you're supposed to do, not only in boxing, but that is carry out with me to life, to be responsible as a man.
The Fort Apache Youth Center in the 1970s was one of the first iterations of something where we're actually actively engaging the youth of our community as a part of our policing strategy.
You know, it showed that they cared. There's a way for communities and NYPD to work together. We can't lose that. What happened back in the 80s, what was built, is something that needs to continue to live on.
We were a 501c3, and so we don't own the property per se. The board of directors own the property, but we had some problems, and a lot of debt with the demolition, and we couldn't afford it. It was $500,000. So we had no option. We had to sell the property, and we did, and we sold the property. So the people who purchased the property had promised to memorialize that site with a youth center. What they're doing is affordable housing. From what I understand, Richard Isquierdo's Garden Apartments, and within that complex, they're gonna make space for a youth center. It's not gonna be named Fort Apache. It's gonna be Fox Street Youth Center, and so it's the same site. So it's I think it's a very nice gesture for them to do that, honoring what was there and what that meant to the community. So it's going to be a little bit down the road, but I'm excited about it. I hope I'm alive to witness the opening of that. But for the people in the community, I think it's going to be great.
The city demolished the buildings when the youth center closed and fell into disrepair. When I realized what the Fort Apache Youth Center was and meant to the community, and that they still owned the site next door, I realized that there was an opportunity to put together really a monumental project. And I was trying to have the Fort Apache Youth Center sell me the adjacent piece that they still owned. And was having a lot of trouble getting traction with the board members. And I cold called Rafael Salamanca, who's the district council member representing that area.
No idea who he was. He gave me a call, random call. And so we sat down, we spoke, and I trusted him, immediately about, his vision of bringing back affordable housing to that area.
And as soon as I showed him a map and what I was planning to do, he stood up at the conference table and goes, I grew up around the corner. All my friends went there. Whatever you need, we're gonna make it happen.
And I'm extremely invested in this project so that number one, we can build this gym, and number two, find funding so that we can create programs for the youth in the South Bronx.
Through some relationships, I came across Jonathan Butler of Radisson Development, who was the right partner to rebuild a new youth center on the site, as well as an affordable housing project.
To bring back a youth center like the Fort Apache Youth Center really means a lot to the community members, the local stakeholders, and will ultimately make this project be successful in terms of activating youth services in an area where they're most needed.
Developers are seeing now that they have to be a lot more than just put up a four-walled structure and provide apartments. First and foremost has to be working with the community board, working with local stakeholders, working with CBOs and just individuals that that are well respected and known in the neighborhood.
First time residents first time getting an apartment, it's exciting, it's new, and to be able to get a apartment such as this makes them happy and joyful. There's others where they've been homeless and been waiting to get an apartment, so it kind of gives them hope from coming from a shelter into an affordable housing apartment. It makes a big difference for them as well. One, from being in a shelter where you're sharing a bed and space to where you have your own apartment, where you can come to your apartment, come to a building with these type of amenities, such as a laundry room, you have a fitness room, you have a roof deck. So all these amenities also gives them like inspiration and hope to say, hey, this is my home.
When I got the affordable housing, I felt good, because it was like my place and nobody couldn't put me out but the landlord. It gave me a lot of freedom because I was just saying, hey, I got my own place, I got my own keys, and I'm good now.